Well, g'day. One of the biggest overhauls in Cities Skylines 2 has got to be the new and improved road tools. There's some very big changes, so I figured I'd put the tools and my skills to the test by first building a big old mess and then trying to fix it the best I can. First, we'd beef up our grand village of Dunyeti, tripling the population, building some pretty basic run-of-the-mill road infrastructure, and just a tiny little sprinkle of some poor city planning practices. Then, when the city grinds to a halt, which it will, and won't look anything too special, we'll spruce it up using some of the new road tools and hopefully ease some of the traffic woes, but then also just make the place look a whole lot more interesting. We'll explore some of the unique and hidden features of the new road mechanics and test to see just how easy they are to use. But then also, let's give our little Dunyetians some public transport options, including trams, buses, and even putting that train station we built in the last episode to use. Speaking of which, when I built the train station, I felt like I brushed over a couple of key moments that I just think deserve a little more attention. First of all, the train station is attached to a train line that is actually part of the depot building. This means that this depot is actually going to have a lot more functionality than I think a lot of people were expecting. Also, it just kind of makes this place feel a little more alive. There's quite a lot of action down here. The train station itself, it was giving me just a little bit of grief. It wasn't lining up to the train line quite like I imagined. This was looking pretty awful. Thankfully, when you do turn off road snapping, you actually have so much more flexibility when it comes to changing where these roads sit. Of course, they are no longer snapping to the grid, but then you are also able just to move it ever so slightly. Bloop! Ain't she a beauty? But that's a train station. I mean, look at this whole depot train station combo with all these lines snaking in and out in between some of these roads. I love it down here. It's so nice. But anyway, that was the last episode. What about this episode? Dunyeti. More like dumb Yeti. But seriously, we did actually have a bit of an education problem. I decided to build the first primary school in the middle of suburbia, but then our high school up on this hillside here. We then hit the tiny town milestone. Lovely. We've got a couple of new features to play with here, most notable the mixed zoning, but we're not quite there yet, so let's get back to work. I wanted this high school to be a little bit of a feature of the city. It was sitting in a pretty prominent spot, and it was also one of the only historical buildings that we had at this time, so I really wanted to put a bit of work into this, surrounding it with a path and also making sure that all the bushes and trees around it were really nice and thick, making sure that we didn't really have too much ground poking through underneath all of this. You can go through using the brush tool, finding all the trees that kind of cover different sizes. I like to find the largest ones first, and then when there's no more room for them, you can go through and find some smaller ones. This actually gives a pretty good ground cover. Now, of course, we do have to wait for these guys to grow, so we'll have to come back here and check it out. By the way, what do you guys think about this whole feature of waiting for trees to grow? I've got real mixed feelings about it. Oh, by the way, it's now winter, just in case you couldn't tell. And also, my screen is cropped a little bit strangely. Don't worry, that's gonna change in like 30 seconds. But in terms of winter, yeah, as you can tell, we do have a pretty big change in color, something that changes quite often when we do have different seasons in this game, and it's gonna start snowing. Oh yeah, here we go. Now, you're actually probably gonna see quite a lot of people playing during wintertime during these newest releases of Cities Skylines 2 gameplays, and I'm sure you're probably feeling maybe a little bit disappointed with the graphics of the snowy season. You might be thinking, hey, how come there's no snow being built up on any of these houses? It's not piling up on any of these trees. There's no snow on the roads. Well, don't worry, this is definitely something they're still working on. In fact, we've actually seen far better snow mechanics in the Cities Skylines 2 trailer, so they do exist. I reckon they're probably working on this behind the scene, and they're giving us a build that just doesn't really quite have it yet, including the nighttime shots. I mean, nighttime and snow season was actually my favorite times to build in Cities Skylines 2 when I built the city for the trailer. So they do exist. They're actually far better than what we're looking at right now. So much so that I don't actually really like this very much. So I'm gonna speed run through all of winter and back. That's better. In order to go truly big, I needed to extend Dunyeti across the river. Rather than just drawing a bridge, dragging a bridge across the river, I decided to start with another place, another town that would eventually grow and get bigger, and then the two places would merge in the middle. This won't be the only one that we end up building, but I did want to build something over here. I always think that this is the most realistic way to build a large city, is to build separate ones kind of close together with their own individual town centers. And then as they grow, as you start developing these places up, they just merge a lot more realistically. As you can tell by the road layout of this new place, it's a little bit more wibbly wobbly. It's not quite as gridded as Danieli. I wanted it to have a little bit of a different style. This is going to make things a lot harder. I also decided to drag out the highway just a little bit differently. I always like it when highways are a little bit more windy and bendy and just do things just slightly different than keeping it very straight. And even just changing some of the bends, making it so that they're not quite as wide, I think just helps with the scale of the place. With the addition of the parallel road tool, just makes life so much easier when it comes to dragging out highways. This definitely should have been a feature of Cities Skylines 1. Whilst dragging out this new road, I noticed that the old road looks slightly different. You can actually see the wear and the tear, the cracks, all the differences of the old road. This is really cool. What a nice little detail. I want to make just the most simplest connection to the highway, connecting up our new little town. This is nothing special. This is just to see how easy it is to make something so simple, and also seeing how easy it is to make it look somewhat decent. Turns out, really easy. I'm not saying that this is anything special, but this took about a minute. In Cities Skylines 1, to make something this detailed, it'd probably take about an hour. With mods. I zoned up a new little town, but then realizing that we're actually still relying on an outside connection for energy, I felt like it was time to grow up, become a real town. We needed to make our own energy. So I decided to head back to Danieli to build a coal power plant. It's always a good idea to build these things out of the city. They are big polluting bad boys, but I do like the way they look. I always like industry kind of close to my cities. I think it's like a nice little contrast rather than building them way out of it. Even though this is way better for land value, it's way better for people's health. I wouldn't want to live next to industry myself, but when it comes to building these places, I like a little bit of grid. Makes things a little bit more interesting. Also, check out this cool bridge that is built. Man, that's nice. I also decided to build some landfill on the other side of Danieli. This is also in our industrial zone on the other side. It's a good spot for it. And with that, I decided to hit play, let people move in, let our industry grow, let the good times roll. Huh, would you look at that? So we did have quite a lot of truck traffic coming into Danieli as they were making their way into the industrial site. But you know what, Danieli, she's pretty tough. She handled it pretty well. Huh, maybe not. Ooh, Boomtown. With this milestone unlocked, we had a couple of new features, but nothing really too notable. Maybe the heavy traffic ban will help us out, but I wasn't really in the mood for that. I want to expand things. See some big changes. Let's get to them. After connecting up our train station to the outside connections and also just improving our fire coverage ever so slightly, these watch tiles should help. I want to get back to Danieli and add some big changes. By big changes, I wanted some larger buildings. We had a lot of growables, we had a couple of service buildings, but we didn't really have any large signature buildings at this stage. You unlock these by achieving different milestones within your city or by the growth of your city, whether or not you're zoning different types of residential or commercial, but in my case, what I really wanted to see was some of these signature industrial buildings. These are really cool, and I think they add a lot to industrial sites. I was already pretty close to achieving some of these. I was gonna go for the dairy house. I was already pretty close to this one. And then the paper factory with all of my forests around, I felt like this was also pretty achievable. So I hit the countryside and got to farming. This is actually pretty easily achieved because I just had to build the one, and then I got it. But then I was in the mood to do a little bit more farming. I felt like we had to do a little bit of expanding out this way anyway. So I continued to drag out these dirt roads, adding in these farms. I'm really being very quick with this, but it can actually add a lot of detail when it comes to these farmlands. I'm not a huge fan of how these actually look, but I am waiting for some mods and some actual custom assets, which I think will add a lot more variation to some of these. I feel the same way about the forestry industry. It's fine, but I do think it could be a little bit better. But regardless, I did unlock the paper factory, which is all I really wanted. The dairy house was the easiest to build. I decided to build it on this second industrial area that we built right up against the water. More detail could be added to this area, but this is fine. The paper factory though, oh man, this thing is massive. So this is going to be a bit of a stretch, but I decided to place it down on this other industrial area. This was a bit of a tight fit. I had to demolish quite a lot of industry and reshuffle around where our train line sat. that is actually not being used at this stage. Next episode we'll get to this. But I actually think that this is the perfect spot. This is super close to our forestry industry. This is also pretty close to our outside connections, and I just think that this is just a pretty nice little spot. Just sort of fits in with this area. Hopefully it doesn't make any pollution. Oh. With all that new industry, of course, now we're gonna have a bunch of new jobs. So it was time to start zoning out some residential. We had quite a lot of demand for single family housing, which was great because I knew the exact spot that I needed to do it. This was an area that was looking a little bit out of place now that the city was starting to expand out. We had this big farmland that needed to be changed. Not to mention that we were having a very standard grid within Dunyetti. I felt like we needed to steer away from that. So I decided to build some more windy roads. These are typically around areas like this, just outside of the city, where we've got very standard grids. We then also have these more bendy roads that you usually see around suburban areas, cul-de-sacs. These roads are kind of snaking around and creating little nooks and crannies for these types of houses. It's a nice little spot to live. I expanded out some of the other suburbs within Dunyetti, and then I realized that, well, we actually didn't have any parks. Whoops. So I just went through adding in some parks here and there, just adding in that little bit of land value boost, especially around some of these residential areas, and that really helped things quite a lot. I decided to also add in some parks on the other side of the river with that little town that we built. Oh, we should probably name this place, right? Not Dunyetti. I mean, it's not done yet, but it's also not really done yet. I figured I should give the same treatment to Not Done Yeti, giving it some windy old suburbs. We've still got so much more to do around Not Done Yeti, but it's getting there. Next milestone, baby! Yeah! So this one's a bit of a special one. I wanted to get this one because now we have access to gated communities. This is an interesting policy. This means that only people that live within this gated community are allowed in. Of course, service vehicles can come in, but anyone else, no siree, you're not allowed in. I actually had a pretty good idea of whereabouts I wanted to build this suburb. I wanted it to be up on this hillside. I already had a road heading in this direction. This was going to be pretty disconnected from the rest of the area, sporting some pretty nice views overlooking the rest of Dunyetti and Not Dunyetti. And then I also planted a whole bunch of trees around here. We got to wait for these things to grow, but yeah, they're here. The terrain was a bit of a pain to work with, but in the end, I think that this little place is going to look real nice. But what do we call this suburb? Well, I feel like gated communities always have such similar names. Almost sound like they could be the name of a soap, or an air freshener, or shampoo, so I decided to call it Morning Breeze. After all that low density zoning, I felt like I needed to get back to the town centres. Zoning out a little bit of row houses, some medium density, and then eventually we're going to be getting into some more high density. Because the thing is, we were actually starting to get to the phase where Dunyetti and Not Dunyetti, we're going to move from being smaller towns. I know we are only at, not even at the big town milestone, but the places were starting to look a little more city-like, which was lovely. It's exactly what I wanted. Plus, we're about to make some changes that we're going to make these places feel way more like cities. I spruced up the land where Dunyetti meets the river, turning this area into a bit of a parkland. We've also got this train line that stretches around here, which is super nice. Of course, not functional at this stage, but next episode. I want to add some extra parks within Dunyetti, giving the place just a little bit more land value, but then also just making the place feel a little bit more like a city. I feel like I needed this. I had unlocked the city hall, which is exactly what we needed in the middle of Dunyetti. I wanted this to be opposite the park that we built in the last episode. I really like this park, but I felt like we needed something extra around here. What I love about these buildings as well is they're not just these unique buildings that you're placing down that have not really any functionality besides attracting tourists. This will actually improve the safety around your city, and you can also expand upon this. So as our little city starts to develop, we can actually add more features to this building, making it just grow like the city will. Unfortunately, to place it down where I wanted it to go, I did have to remove our underground tunnel. Now this was going to cause some problems. That's a problem for another day. For another day, I mean, maybe like in 5 minutes, but it's fine. It's fine. I also decided to spruce up the rest of the area, adding in some more row houses, but this time European style. making this place feel a little bit more historical. I decided to give the same treatment to the space at the front of our train station. This was always bothering me. It felt like we needed to have something more grand, something that felt like it was there for a little bit longer. So I decided to build a park and then also add in some more row houses and just give this whole area just a little bit of TLC. And speaking of tender love and care, I felt like it was time to actually put in a bit of effort into one of these roads. This was an area that I felt like was front and center of Dunyetti. I really wanted to make a road that was around here that was sort of special, did something a little bit more unique, something we couldn't do in Cities Skylines 1. With a bit of a height difference here, I felt like this was the perfect spot to experiment with a bit of cutting into the land. Because we are dragging a road right up against this cliff, we are actually able to cut into the land so that we've actually got this retaining wall, but then for some reason, and very nicely, but then also not on purpose, I also was able to make this little race section on the right hand side. That was nice. I spent a little bit of time just experimenting, trying to see if I can make this even better than it was before. I reckon there's a real trick to this. I'm really just sort of experimenting this stage, but I reckon this is a pretty cool little trick that I'm definitely going to be working with a little bit more. We had a little bit of space up top for a park. I also raised up this area a little bit more so that we had a bit of a lookout. And with that, this whole area is starting to look just a whole lot better. And just like that, we hit the big town milestone. This was an important milestone for me. This was as far as I was allowed to go past. I can continue building on this milestone, but I can't go any further. We also unlocked some high density housing, but most importantly, this was the moment that I was going to check out Dunyetti and not Dunyetti and see just how well these places were holding out. As it turns out, they were doing okay. I mean, in terms of traffic, we don't exactly have any absolutely terrible... okay, we do have a couple of places. Yeah, so the traffic was not that great. As it turns out, having one road into your city is not the greatest of ideas, especially when it's just at a T intersection. It meant that anyone who was going to travel between the two places had to go just on one road. There were no other options. So we needed to bridge the gap. We needed another bridge between Dunyetti and not Dunyetti. But where would we build that? Here, right here. In fact, I had always planned to build this bridge. In fact, I started building this bridge all the way back when it was snowing. But then I deleted it. Because you know why? I knew that that would be a much better build to do at the end of this video. Yeah, I'm a sneaky YouTuber. You've been had. Huh. I wanted this bridge to be old. I wanted it to feel like it's been there for a long time. It's a bridge that is pretty heart and center of both Dunyetti and not Dunyetti, because this is a bridge that's probably been connecting these two places for a very long time. Maybe even before that other bridge is there. Now, of course, this bridge is not exactly high capacity, but I kind of like it for that reason. At this stage, I don't know if we really need that high capacity for this area. We're just gonna have to wait and see. And you know, I like the idea of potentially having to upgrade this over time, maybe even adding in an extra lane or maybe even adding in an extra bridge. We'll just have to wait and see. But I decided just to make one old section of this bridge on the Dunyetti side of things, but then on the other side, the not Dunyetti, this was going to be a more modern bridge. But what's going to sit on this island? Well, I'll put that to you guys. What should we build here? I'm sort of thinking maybe this would be a good spot for the university. I don't know. I also went through and started to change some of the restrictions on this road. Now that it was a more busy road, I wanted to make it so that you couldn't turn left and cross the street, and you couldn't cross the street if you're a pedestrian. You know, add a little bit of restrictions. We'll come back here and refine this a little bit later on in this episode, but for now, it's there. I actually want to build another bridge. This bridge was going to be a little bit further out of Dunyetti. This was kind of connecting up this other road, another main road that was kind of bypassing Dunyetti in the first place. I felt like this was going to be a good one to actually go across the river. And again, potentially, this might be upgraded to a more substantial highway. I like choosing roads that feel like they are going into a direction that makes sense. You know, this road is probably going to go somewhere that is another town or to a destination, or is a road that has been there for a while. But for now, I'm just going to connect it up to the highway, making a pretty easy connection. I really just want to see just how easy it is to make some of these connections, because again, this was something that took a very long time in Cities Skylines 1. With this one, it's pretty easy to make. But you know, all these roads are all well and good, but what happens if you don't own a car? Well, we do have some other options. The train line in Dunyetti has been very underutilized up until now. We haven't really had any connections going anywhere else besides our outside connection, which hasn't really been seeing a huge amount of usage. So I decided to drag out this line crossing the river and connecting up Not Done Yeti. Though this is a train station that is kind of out of the way. For now, I'm actually thinking that this area is going to be turned into another skyline. This might even be our third city, but I don't really know at this stage. But I did want to place this train station here. I actually wanted to place it a little bit closer to Not Done Yeti, but there wasn't really a huge amount of room, and the terraforming around here is actually pretty tricky. We have some crazy height differences. As you can see, as I'm dragging out this train line from our train station, this is a pretty big height difference. But it was pretty fun trying to make this thing work. We do have huge amounts of control when it comes to raising up this train line and making it so that it can actually make some of these clearances. It's pretty tricky. And I am used to playing with Anarchy and, all these different tools that I use, all these different mods that I use in Cities Skylines 1 that I don't have in this one. But I'm gonna be honest, I'm really enjoying playing with some of the limitations, but then also some of the features of this game, because I do feel like that sometimes when you do have these restrictions, it actually forces you to be a little bit more creative, which is what's happening right here. But I did eventually get more connected up. I have to admit, this whole area is looking pretty bloody ugly. We're gonna have to come back here and work on it. What do you think this place ends up looking like? But most importantly, where do you think this train line ends up going? Because I don't think that this is a terminal. I think that we actually have to drag this line somewhere else, but I don't really know where that line's gonna go yet. What do you reckon? I connected up our train stations with a service. Not a huge amount of people using at this stage. I mean, we kind of expected that. Nothing's really out here. I decided to place down a high school, hopefully encouraging people to come out this way. Again, still looking pretty average, very bare bones. And because we now have our high school over here, I decided to replace our old high school now with a college, which I actually think is a far better fit. But let's get back to some of these roads. Because the thing is, no amount of public transport or roads, other roads going across the river was going to fix this intersection. We really need to get down here and make something a little bit better. And by better, I mean a monstrosity. Because the thing is, I needed to connect up these two roads. I needed to make it so that vehicles could actually travel between our bridge and then also go on to this fairly main road that is actually heading out to some very important locations. So we did need to have something here, and you know what? I've actually got the tools to be able to do something that's pretty interesting. Because the thing is, when you turn off snapping, it means that you actually have so much flexibility when it comes to placing out these roads into the places you actually want. And then the roads actually just kind of change and maneuver around these different areas and interact with one another that make really interesting and fun ways of creating intersections and building around landscapes. As you can see, we've got roundabouts being placed, and we've also got infrastructure just popping up and saying, hey, do you want to build that there? Maybe, maybe not. But it also kind of inspires you to go, oh, hey, I didn't know you could do that. Because there are going to be things that I think we're going to go and try and connect up, and then all of a sudden, something's going to pop up and say, hey, do you actually want to build this piece of infrastructure? And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I will. And I guess that's just a long way of me saying that I was just kind of winging this. I was really just winging it and just seeing what was popping up and giving me a suggestion and kind of just poking me in the right direction or wrong direction. Because the thing is, of course, this is not exactly the most pleasant looking interchange you've ever seen. This is pretty wonky and chonky, but again, I kind of like that sort of stuff when it comes to intersections. I always think it's more interesting when they have to work around their environment, working around buildings and pre-existing infrastructure, not just a cookie cutter, hey, here's our intersection, here it is, plop, there it is. So it might not be the greatest looking intersection, but was it the best functioning intersection? Also no, but I actually had a lot of fun going through the rest of the city, trying to find intersections and places where I could turn off pedestrian crossings and making it so that you couldn't turn left or right or even go straight ahead. And by doing so, I was actually able to change the behavior of traffic within the city rather than going through and building massive interchanges and building giant freeways, which we will be doing probably in the next episode because it is a part of this whole city and trying to make that work and playing around with some of those functionalities. But I actually really enjoy just trying to work on the tiny bits of detail, tiny bits of road behavior, and finding things that I thought could be changed ever so slightly that could actually make a bigger impact on the way that traffic was moving around the city. And to be honest, I didn't really see a huge amount of improvement in terms of traffic at this stage. It was more that I was just noticing that people were behaving differently and going into different places of the city just to try and get from point A to point B. It was kind of cool. But after all that, yeah, it was time to get back into some more public transport. I decided to place down a tram network. This was going to be something that I would really like to make a bigger feature of Dunedin, potentially branching off into not Dunedin and going into other places of our cities. When it comes to dragging out a network, I was just trying to find places that I felt like were going to make the most amount of sense, going to some of the highest density, going to places that were prime locations or prime destinations for people, such as the college, such as apartment blocks, the train station, but then also thinking about where I would actually like to see trams going to. Speaking of which, we made our journey all the way to the train station and I needed to get the tram network back over to the other side of the city. Of course though, we did have this big monstrosity interchange ugliness in the way. This was going to be a bit of a problem. I had to try and figure out a way of getting this over to the other side. Rather than going back through the intersection, adding just more vehicles to this traffic, I decided to make this route so that it went underneath the bridge and totally avoiding all that congestion. It was not perfect and it was a little bit clunky and probably not that realistic, but I actually think this looks pretty cool. I wanted to connect up quite a lot of suburbs with our network, so it is going through the heart of a couple of different places, including that windy one up in the hillside, which is a really nice little touch. And with that, it was time to start connecting this thing up, placing down some stops, which is what you have to do when you drag out a network. You actually have to place down the stops, and then you can connect up your line wherever those stops are. And when it comes to the service, I'm gonna be honest, I kind of just dragged it wherever. I didn't really know where I was placing it. I was really just kind of going through and trying to figure out where this would be the best places to go for this network and trying to make it so that each area was covered. And if this was a more permanent city, if this is something that I was going to be working on for a long time, I'd probably have a much better idea where these networks are going. But hey, there are trams going in some of these places. That's good enough. And you know what's even better? People were actually using this. Far more people than our train line, that's for sure. The last thing that I wanted to do with this build is I wanted to place down and drag out a bus network. This is going to connect up not Dunedin and Dunedin so that we actually had something a little bit more substantial in terms of public transport. Buses, they get a pretty bad rap, but in Cities Skylines, people love to catch these things. Similar to the trams, you actually have to place down the bus stations and the bus shelters in order to actually place down the stops. This does add a couple of extra layers when it comes to building public transport. I do kind of like this though. And again, similar to the tram network, I really don't have any good idea of where I'm placing out this service. I mean, I'm pretty much just connecting it up, making it so that I'm making sure that we have buses going to pretty much everywhere that I've placed a bus shelter or a bus stop. And again, people are using this quite a lot. People love buses in this game. I wish people loved trains a little bit more in this game, but that's fine, I understand. Well, it was making a pretty big impact on our land value. And it was also making a pretty big impact on the way that people were actually getting around. They weren't just locked to one way of getting between our two places. And it is just so fun seeing how people are making their journey to work, to our different parks. And of course, you can do a lot of these things in Cities Skylines 1 with the addition of mods and even some things without mods, but this is just so much easier. I wasn't spending hours building one intersection, or it just makes building a city so much faster and so much easier and so much simpler, which I am all about. It's exciting to see a city just come alive so quickly. Not that this was quick, but definitely a whole lot easier. There's still so much more to do in Dunedin and in not Dunedin, but I guess we'll just have to wait until the next episode. Hey champs, thank you all so much for watching today's episode of Dunedin. I guess that's what we're calling it. If you've got any suggestions for future development, please let me know in the comment section. Also let me know what you're thinking about with Cities Skylines 2, what you're loving, what you're not loving, and what you are hoping to see down the track, because things are going to change. Also, I'm getting pretty close to 200,000 subscribers. I might even hit that by the end of the week. If you want to help out with that and haven't subscribed yet, I'd love that. And a big shout out to all of my beloved patrons supporting the channel, making videos like this possible. George Bravo, Impulse Music, Glocks Gaming, Crim Noise, Robert Green, Garrett Day, Derek Vidal, Patrick Callahan, and Tim Tam biscuits. Thanks guys, see you on the next one. Bye.